Shabbat Shalom and welcome everyone to study number 23 of the Book of Acts. We've had a few other studies in between on the festivals, and there's a few more festivals coming up. Who knows what's the next one coming up? Feast of Trumpets. Is it? Rosh Hashanah, yes. Yeah, you did. It's good. So yes, we're working through the Book of Acts. We've actually managed to reach chapter 5 this week. So thank you, Ryan and Judith and Daniel and Elise, for I think you did 20 odd chapters, 20 odd verses last week. Yeah, you covered well. See, I have to go away more often so you go through this faster, eh? So I'm Ralph Medozelski of Derek HaMashiach. We are a Beit Midrash, a house of learning. This week we will take a closer look at what happens in chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira, why it happened, or why we think it happened, and the most pressing question, which we probably won't, I know we won't get to today, but we'll get to in a couple of weeks, is, you all know the story roughly about Ananias and Sapphira. They dropped dead because they lied. And the big question that everyone has on that is, what about grace? What happened to grace in that circumstance? So we won't touch that this week, though.
Not because we haven't got a mindset, but
No, because we want to finish our group study on the salvation topic, so that next week we can present that as groups, and hopefully we can tie it up into something that makes sense. And then the week after we will look at that particular issue of what about grace. Before we go too far, though, I wanted to share with you a video from Venezuela. Yeah, you can do that. Thanks. This is a video. We supported the blind children. Yeah, the front one. Yeah. Supported the blind children in Venezuela a while ago through the GoFundMe. I think I put it on our Facebook site. Can you still see me on camera? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And they put together a bit of a video of the children there on Shabbat. So I'll play that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Yeshua, Ministerio Venezuela, te invita a solidarizarte en esta campaña a beneficio de niños ciegos, padecimiento de cáncer y con discapacidad que sufren los embates de la dictadura comunista de Nicolás Maduro. Venezuela, a causa de los hacedores de iniquidad, está abrumada en la crisis económica y humanitaria más grande del planeta. Niños y sus madres necesitan de tu mano. Colabora y comparte en esta campaña y se te multiplicará con tu aporte y ayuda para la adquisición de alimentos y medicamentos. Que la bendición y la sobreabundancia espiritual de nuestro Rey Yeshua ilumine tu camino para que tus pies no tropiecen con piedra en tu camino. Shalom Aleichem.
basically what he was saying was something along the lines of I have to remember it now. But basically what he was saying was, due to the political climate and the dictatorships that have ruined the country, children are in poverty, and they're can't remember the rest of it. Basically, that was the thrust of it. So
you could see people trying to get food from the back of a garbage truck.
Yeah.
Food that people were throwing away. So
yeah.
Thanks. Oops. So the Messianic believer over there that I connected with is Hector on the left-hand side. And the couple that we met in Colombia when we went to the conference over there is Amelia and Johnny on the right-hand side, and their children. So it's an interesting story because that the whole reason this all sort of came about, see the prayer shawl that Hector's wearing? His prayer shawl was confiscated by the army, the Venezuelan army, because they didn't support Messianic Judaism or even Judaism. And we were communicating. I said, look, I'll send you my prayer shawl, and trying to work out how to get it to him. Ended up this couple from Venezuela came to the conference. We were able to give it to the couple. They ended up meeting with him, gave it to him. So now he's got the prayer shawl. But the best part of all is they're starting to work together now. I've got quite a bit of stuff here to. He's been sending emails. I think his English is not very good, so he uses Google Translate, and so it comes out a bit funny. So you can see some of it there, but I'll just go to the next one, and I'll play this one again. There's no sound on this, no. They're looking for a translator in Venezuela to translate it to English, but there's the two guys working together, and there's another lady, I'm not sure who that one is. So obviously they're going to do some talking, and what they want to do is translate it to English and also Austrian, because as it turns out, there's an Austrian family as well supporting them, and there's a lady in New Zealand supporting them as well as the Hawaiian people that Hector is under the Messianic Yeshiva there. So it's all quite exciting. Obviously, there's not much money coming in yet, but what happened was when the couple that we met in Colombia, Johnny and Amelia, came, they actually realised that couple are in a worse scenario than Hector is. So that's why he gave them 130 kilograms of food for their children, because they're in a remote location. They have hardly any internet or telephone access. And in the last email, he was saying that Johnny and Amelia have to buy their food off the black market because they don't have an open ticket as to buying unlimited food. And so for them, the food costs 6 or 7 times more than what it does with Hector. So they're banding together, and the support that Hector's getting is actually then buying food for them, because he's got more of an unlimited supply of food that he can buy. So he's buying food, giving it to them, and then they have to track it back into their village. So the reason I share that is because we want to continue to keep supporting these guys, and I've been trying to work out what's the best way to go through. Johnny and Amelia are supported by a ministry in San Antonio, isn't it? Yeah. And we've been communicating with them to see how we can get money to them or through them to Johnny and Amelia. But it looks like it might be better to get it to Hector, who can buy the food cheaper than they can. So I still have to do a little bit more homework, but that's what we want to do in the long run is continue to support these people over there. So you're.
Like we don't have a concept of
and that's exactly what I was asking the guys in San Antonio. But it obviously sounds like Amelia and Johnny would need 5 times as much as what Hector does, because they have to pay much more for their food on the black market. So
crazy.
Yeah,
crazy.
I mean we're looking at doing $100 a month from Derek HaMashiach. Limited funds at the moment, so we can only do so much, but that's roughly what we're looking at doing to support them. So, I mean, just a simple offering a prayer shawl to someone ends up in something like this is really great. You'd never think about it, that it could lead to something beneficent. And the other thing I wanted to also say is, Marie and I have been talking about the drought in Australia and supporting the farmers. So we're looking at also doing something through Drought Angels Ministry, so providing some funds there to the farmers. So if you know any other ministry that is more from a Christian angle or more religious orientated, so there's some spiritual input there as well, please let us know. And I'd rather support the farmers through that, but if there's nothing available, then we'll go through the Drought Angels or whoever we think is the best opportunity. So all right, so back to the study on the book of Acts, and we'll start with the prayers. Right, so Acts chapter 5 verse 1 to 10. Any volunteers to read that? Thanks. Looks like Ryan's got it there. Unless someone else is ready. No?
Okay, 1 to 10.
Yep.
A certain man named Hananiah and his wife Shapira sold their property. He took some of the proceeds and hid it with his wife's knowledge. He bought one portion and placed it at the feet of the Shlichim, Petros, and said, Petros said, Hananiah, why has the Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to hide some of the proceeds of the field? Was it not yours before it was sold? And also after it was sold, was it not in your hand? Why did you place this matter on your heart? You have not lied to the sons of men, but to God. When Hananiah heard these words, he fell on the ground and expired. Great fear came upon all those who heard. The younger ones arose and gathered him and carried him outside and buried him. And at about 3 hours later, his wife came. She did not know what had happened. Petros spoke up and said to her, Tell me, are these the proceeds of the field that you sold? She said, Yes, these are the proceeds. Petros said to her, Why have you counseled together to test the spirit of Hashem? Look, at the door are the feet of those burying your husband, and they will carry you outside. She suddenly fell at his feet and died. The young men came and saw that she was dead, so they carried her outside and buried her beside her husband.
Thank you. I think it's pronounced Hananiah as well. Yeah, I think. Yeah, Hananiah. Yeah. So that's we know them as Ananias and Sapphira, but it's Hananiah in Hebrew. So when we read this account of Hananiah and I put Shapira, Sapphira, it's difficult for us to comprehend sometimes, especially when we come from the Christian background, of the perspective of grace. Typical understanding is that during the Old Testament period, there was no grace, and then because Yeshua took all our sins from us, in the New Testament, in the New Testament period, God is all grace, and that's our sort of concept that we've grown up with, and this sort of doesn't really follow that line because we're now in the New Testament period, and we see these couple just bang dropping dead. There's actually quite a bit to this story in chapter Acts, and we'll see we can work through some of that. Firstly, on the surface level, it just reminds me of another account, and you can see it there. But remember the story of Nadab and Abihu when they wanted to offer strange fire to God, and that also seemed a little bit shocking. The fire of God just lashes out and burns them. Their clothes weren't singed, but they were burnt. They were dead. So very, very interesting concept there. But again, all they were offering was strange fire or unholy fire, and that seems like quite a harsh sort of penalty. And here in the book of Acts, chapter 5, all we've got is Hananiah and Sapphira holding some money back. Really, they would face value. They were doing the right thing. They were putting money at the Shlichim's feet and saying, "Here, use it for the community." So it's there's a lot deeper things going on here than just what we see at face value. So see if we can unpack some of these. Let's have another look at verses 1 to 3 in chapter 5. So we see here it says, "But there was a man named Hananiah who, with his wife," it is Shapira, there we go, sold some property, and with his wife's knowledge withheld some of the proceeds for himself, although he did bring the rest to the emissaries. Then Kepha said, Why has the adversary so filled your heart that you lie to the Ruach HaKodesh and keep back some of the money you received for the land?" So that there's two little words there that are quite interesting. Verse 2, we've got the word, or the sentence here, it says, withheld some of the proceeds for himself. And verse 3, we've got the words keep back. In the Greek root word, they're both the same. They're both this noshphizomai word, so which actually just means keep back. So in the translation, it's just been put in to fit the English reading, but that's what the root word means, to either keep back or to sequestrate for oneself. Now, at the time of the Shechim, in the First Temple period, any good Jew would have known straight away what that was referring to when they heard that word keep back. It was actually a reference to Achan or Achan in Joshua chapter 7. So let's have a look at that. Joshua chapter 7 verse 1 says, "But the people of Israel misappropriated some of the goods set aside to be destroyed. For Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zavdi, the son of Zerach, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the things reserved for destruction. In consequence, the anger of Adonai blazed up against the people of Israel." So the word here in the Hebrew, the word took, is exactly the same word when it's translated into the Septuagint, which is the Greek word, the Greek translation of the Tanakh. The Septuagint uses the same Greek word, whatever I pronounced before. I can't pronounce it. But it's exactly the same word as what's used in Acts chapter 5, where it says they held some back for themselves or kept back. So the same root word. So anybody that knew their Septuagint at the time and heard what Shimon Kepha was saying would have known straight away the reference that this is going back to Achan's sin. So what was the thing about Achan's sin then? Can we remember? Yeah, kept some of the stuff that, all of it was meant to be destroyed, but he thought he would keep some back for himself.
Bring a plague or something?
Sorry?
Did it bring a plague?
Yeah, well, who was suffering as a result of his sin?
Israel.
All of Israel. So remember a few studies back we talked about all of Israel is accountable to one another.
Yeah.
So one person's sin, the whole camp was held accountable. Now we see this picture here in, before I go too much further, so the Hebrew word here is lakah, which means took. Reserve, seize, take away, use. It implies to take for your own use, which is the similar wording that was used in chapter 5, where it says, withheld some proceeds for himself. It's the same concept in the translation, to take for your own use. So we see then that this is exactly the same scenario as in Joshua. We have one couple that are deciding to go against Hashem, and who would have been held accountable for this? The whole Messianic community.
Yeah.
So straight away, that's why Shimon, that's one reason why Shimon Kepha would have been so straightforward with them, because it affects the whole community, not just Hananiah and Shapira.
Puts a bit of weightiness straight away on that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a grave, grave thing if everyone's accountable for what you do. Did they lose a war because of cancer?
Yes, sorry, it wasn't a plague, it was a war.
It was a war, wasn't it? Yeah, exactly.
It was a war that they should have won because it was like really, really small.
Right.
They were fighting a really, really small.
Yeah. And other times they fought really big armies, and they always won because God was on their side. But this time, because of that sin, it affected the whole nation and their outcome. So just to give some more semi-relevant background to Hananiah and Sapphira, their names in Hebrew, so Hananiah's name meant the Lord has favoured, and her name, Sapphira, meant beautiful. The Hananiah's name was a Jewish Orthodox name. So as Rabbi Shapira says, no one in their right mind that's a secular Jew would name their son Hananiah. Okay, this is a total Orthodox Jewish name. So he would have come from a strict Orthodox background at that time. Sapphira, on the other hand, was exclusively amongst the Jerusalem rich of the first century. So besides her, there's another 9 women by the same name, and they were in tombs around Jerusalem, and so they were from a fairly well-off background. So it's quite likely that this rich couple wanted to sell their property. They were well off. They wanted to join the community, who basically were not necessarily made of people who were well off. Some of the people had no jobs, sold all their stuff to come to Jerusalem. Remember what we talked about last week? That this wasn't a holistic type of lifestyle, selling your stuff and joining the community. It was really a community of need. That's why things were sold to support the need of others. So I think we can sort of start to see the heart issue of the problem here. The Messianic community was selling their goods to support one another for a practical reason. Now we have this rich couple that decide to do it for, I don't know what their reasons were, but they sell everything, they give some in, they keep some for themselves. They basically want to become supported by the community, but still have something for themselves on the side. And yeah, go on.
Sorry, this immediately reminds me of what we talked about last week with the rich young ruler.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're both from well-off, particularly her from a well-off background, you shouldn't say sell some of your things and follow me. You said sell everything you have and follow me. So it was like they were just trying to have it both ways in a sense.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Although, remember, you also talked about you don't have to sell everything and don't have to give everything. It's really, and that's what Shimon Keefer said to them. He said, it was yours at the beginning when you sold it.
Yeah.
It was really up to you as to how much you give. It's just don't be dishonest about it. Just if you would have been open, we're giving this much, but we're going to keep some for ourselves, then that would have been a different story. So the people that were being supported by the generous donations of others were not just doing this because of more spiritual or monastic lifestyle. They were doing it for sincere reasons. And then come along Ananias and Sapphira, who want to be supported by that same community but still have their little thing on the side. So it impacts the whole community. Covered that. Sorry, I'm just going through reading what we've already talked about. There's no point in covering that again. So they hope to become dependents, with their own possessions, which brings us to, what did we read in chapter 1 of the Didache?
Chapter 1 of the Didache.
Yes. What did it say there?
Chapter 1 of the Didache.
No one can remember chapter 1. It was only 7 chapters ago. Give to everyone that asks thee, and do not refuse. For the Father's will is that we give to all from the gifts we have received. Blessed is he that gives according to the mandate, for he is innocent. But he who receives without need shall be tried as to why he took, and for what. So I wonder if that was actually put into the Didache because of Ananias and Sapphira. I mean, possible. But there is the guideline, and we know that lines up with Judaism's teaching at the time about how to give money and how to receive money. So the whole thing, they were trying to receive money when they didn't really need it. Because they gave to the community, but then they were going to become supported by that community where they didn't really have to, because they had money on the side. We don't know how much money they had on the side. It doesn't say. All right, so lying to the Ruach HaKodesh. So this was more than just a case of defrauding the Messianic community. Those who are truly in need, but it's also about lying to the Ruach HaKodesh, which, if we want to look at it holistically, was really one and the same thing, because we are the body of Messiah. The Ruach lives in us, so if you're lying to the body, you're lying to the ruach at the same time. But we'll break it a little bit apart more because there is an interesting point here. So we see that in verse 4, Shimon points out that he didn't just lie to men, but he lied to the ruach. So we need to look at that in a bit more detail. In the days of the Shluchim, Jewish people often vowed property to the temple, donating the proceeds of sales to the temple treasury. So that was a common thing that was already happening. It wasn't new to the Messianic community. It is quite likely that Hananiah and Sapphira took a similar vow, that is to donate all the proceeds to the Messianic community when they decided to take their donation before the Shluchim. So when you take a vow, what do we know about that from Deuteronomy 23? We know that when you make a vow to Adonai your God, you are not to delay in fulfilling it. For Adonai your God will certainly demand it of you, and your failure to do so will be your sin. If you choose not to make a vow at all, that will not be a sin for you. But if the vow passes your lips, you must take care to perform it according to what you voluntarily vowed to Adonai your God, what you promised in words spoken aloud. Well, that's interesting. So it's more than just a vow in the heart. You actually have to speak it aloud. So there's some weight behind the words that we speak.
Is it also that you have witnesses?
Probably, yeah. Because when you speak it aloud, you're normally sharing it with someone else who becomes a witness to that vow. But God's also a witness to that vow at the same time. So the scene in Acts 5 reflects what is set out in Numbers 15:30, where it says, "But an individual who does something wrong intentionally, whether a citizen or a foreigner, is blaspheming Adonai. That person will be cut off from his people." The word cut off here is the word karat in Hebrew. This word is used to describe a stroke of death by the hand of heaven. And you put yourself into that scene of, he comes before Shimon. Shimon says, "Why have you lied, not just to men, but to God?" And he drops dead, straight from heaven. So you can see we're in the New Testament period. Grace is supposed to abound, but bang, these things still happen. Why? 2 weeks' time. It's too long a subject to cover here, unfortunately, today. So at this, we see that several of the young Talmudim rose up from before the Shluchim and prepared Hananiah for burial. And then they carried him off to a tomb. This was all done in 3 hours. Do I have to change? No. And apparently without his wife Sapphira's consent, which is very unusual because normally you involve the family when you do this sort of thing. Because when she came, she didn't know a thing about what was happening. And she also suffered the same fate, though, when she arrived, because she also lied. She actually had an opportunity to repent because she was asked, "Is this what you sold for?" And she conspired with her husband. She decided to continue the lie. The husband didn't even have the time to defend himself, really. Shimon Kiefer just said, "Why have you done this?" And bang. And she at least said, "Yes, we did." And then she was gone because she also conspired to lie. But then they took her and buried her as well. So just finishing off on this, it's probably that the fact that the whole thing took such quick time in 3 hours, plus I don't know how long it took for her, but it suggests that this happened on the Friday, the day before Shabbat, and they were trying to get things done quickly. And maybe that's why they skipped talking to her about burying Hananiah. I don't know, but it seems unusual that they would do that. But there was obviously some reason to hurry things up, possibly the Shabbat, or could have been something else. Who knows? So, as I said, next week we'll look at, 2 weeks' time, we'll look at the subject of grace. And what we'll do now, we'll stop and we're going to reformulate our little groups for the salvation presentation next week. So we've got about 20 minutes to do that. Make sure that we're happy with everything we're doing there. But before we go any further, any questions about what we've just talked about? I know it was pretty short. But I wanted to give you time to just finalise for next week.
Not giving everything, but the sin is vowing to give everything and not doing that. So had they just said, we're going to give you 50%, and they gave the 50%, they wouldn't have died.
Exactly, yeah. They just had to be open and honest about what they were going to give. And then once they decided what to give, then give that, you know. If it was the whole lot, then that's what they were stuck with, you know. They probably would have been supported from that for the rest of their lives, who knows. It sounds like it was quite a bit that they gave in.
But we know there's more to the equation, for want of a better word. It's not just that alone.
No, but
It couldn't be, because there would have been others that would have also lied. I mean, I say sometimes you vow and you're not even aware of what you vow. Like, I don't know.
yeah,
I think it was on purpose though. Like it was really a
Premeditated.
heart matter. Like they purposely did it. It wasn't like, oh, oops, I forgot about that vow.
Yeah, I think
So
you're right.
it's like purposely
Yeah, it's not just.
deceitful.
Premeditated.
Shows a real wrong, like something
Yeah.
wrong with their.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I think.
Almost like a hypocrite. You know how you describe the hypocrite as the actor that overdoes everything and
Yeah.
promises to be very
They
generous.
wanted
but
to look way better than they
Yeah,
actually were.
that's it, yeah.
Yeah, because they came in front of the whole community. They
That's
didn't have
true.
to, yeah. And I guess it
Valid,
ties
yeah.
with what you tied it in with the dedicate of you shouldn't pretend to need to be taken care of if you don't need to be taken care of,
Yeah.
because that
They're
steals
kind of
from
robbing.
the people who actually
Yeah.
need
Yeah,
it.
they're
So
kind of robbing at
this,
the same time.
yeah,
as
this one
being
wrong
greedy.
would actually do more wrong, like more harm to the people who actually need it. It's like, you know, a rich man sitting among going to the soup kitchen to get free food,
Yeah.
even though they can buy their own.
Right.
Was that the mechanics of it, that they would obtain, like they were freeloading? I mean,
if they would have joined the community,
supported more by the community if they gave everything, which they were sort of saying that they had, so they would have got more from.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how they would have distributed that, but they would have got from the community, and then on the side, because they had that little bit on the side, they would have enjoyed the extra luxuries. And I mean that's a little bit defrauding the community by saying, oh, well, we'll take our little soup bowl, but then we'll have our chocolates and all that sort of on the side. It's like if they would have just been honest up front and given half and said, here, look, half, that would have been so generous, but we're going to keep the rest of the half. And look, if we really ever run out, the community would have said, yeah, sure, we'll help you.
Or like a pastor who works a job yet relies on the community church, coffers to buy things and then asks for another jet on top or something,
Yeah,
Like, can you pay,
yeah.
I've got this money, but God really needs me to have this,
Jet.
To have
or
a fourth
anything
jet.
really. Yeah.
As someone said to me on the phone on the weekend, during the week, he said there's a ministry in America that's asking their supporters for money for a fourth jet, because when Yeshua comes back, he's not going to be riding on the donkey, okay? He's going to be flying in one of my jets, apparently. So he needs a fourth jet for Messiah when he comes back.
So I guess it's like this fooling of
That's really putting God in a box.
like just misused, generosity, because people are giving their tzedakah, which is a commandment of God, to give their tzedakah to the Messianic community. Like people give tzedakah to church or whatever, and then that is being misused. So same thing with how they would have been supported by the tzedakah given to the Messianic community, even though they didn't need that support. So it's you're basically robbing the opportunity for the person who gave that tzedakah to fulfill a mitzvah, because they're not actually helping a poor person because you're rich.
Yeah.
So it's like you're stealing, even like deeper, you're stealing their,
And it sounds like they were, because their names, Sapphira was pretty popular in Jerusalem, and it was part of the Jerusalem rich elite. It doesn't sound like they sold their possessions from somewhere else and moved to Jerusalem, because that was the whole point, that the other people, they didn't have jobs, they didn't have income, they probably,
They were temple sect.
who knows where they stayed. That's why they needed support, because they didn't have that. But they were already in Jerusalem. They didn't have to sell all stuff to join them. They would have been part of the community as it was. It's a little bit, it's, we're only guessing at some of the motivations that they had. So we can't say for sure. But obviously there was something there for God to say, no, this can't go on. And something there for Shimon Kefa to not even extend any level of grace to them
As it appears.
as it appears. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for this never to be repeated again to the best of our knowledge, that's where you scratch your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's so multifaceted in that we think, oh, they died, they've gone to hell, or they've gone to eternal
that's
punishment.
That's the
I
other
don't
thing.
believe that at all. I think
No.
it's a case of they receive their reward in this life, and they may
It
have a
says
reward
that,
in life
yeah.
to come, but it might not be as great as those who gave endlessly or
Yeah.
kept the vows. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So particularly in that time, Second Temple period, the whole idea of death, afterlife, and judgment wasn't pinned down 100%.
No.
So yeah.
It actually was. Now that you mention it, and we'll talk more about it next week. But yeah, Yeshua did put more framework around it, and then the apostles put even more framework around what it meant, because life after death in Judaism's point of view was quite different to as we understand it now. So they wouldn't have thought they went to hell because of that. It would have just been, well, when the time comes, God will restore their souls to them, and they'll be resurrected for whatever
Reward
purpose,
that,
reward.
little reward is left.
And that's a huge Jewish mindset that we have to
Yeah.
have a shift in our own.
Yeah. More on that next week. All right. So to those online, Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for joining us for this really short study.